Haunting in Connecticut, a shocking story that put fear into the hearts of people back in 1992. But soon after, the story started falling apart, and people began to ask, is the Snedeker family telling the truth? Or did they just create a hoax? And are the Warrens pulling the strings of everyone involved? This has fueled the ongoing debate surrounding this case for many years since. So, what's the truth behind this haunting? This has been very interesting, to say the least, to research. I actually ended up in a very deep rabbit hole as I was researching this. There are so many inconsistencies in statements and so much footage. Oh my gosh, guys, I watched so many interviews and listened to so many podcasts, and I listened to a lot of interviews by the family. Let me tell you, I am tired of listening to this family. But, before we get into this, those that are new to the channel, I forgot to mention this. What we do in these episodes is first I tell you the story of the haunted location. Then I'll deep dive into fact checking and debunking it. This being part of the Warren series, we of course are going to dissect the Warrens' role in this case. A Haunting in Connecticut. It was 1986. When the Snedeker family's eldest son, Philip, got diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce that. It was a blow to the family, but there was hope. The catch, however, was a 6 to 8 hour drive from New York to get cobalt radiation treatment in Connecticut. The long travel time was very difficult on Philip, and his parents Carmen and Alan felt that it was making him worse. So they decided to start looking for a place to rent in Connecticut to give Philip a fighting chance. Now they were having a lot of trouble finding a place because they had a family of 4, and that apparently was an issue back then. But one day, luck would have it that Carmen came across a house as she was traveling through Connecticut. The rent was very affordable, and they didn't mind that the family had 4 kids. So she signed the lease, and the family began the move to the new home. However, there's a dark side to the story. Unbeknownst to them, the house had a dark history. It was formerly a funeral home, Hallahan Funeral Home. This is where numerous bodies had been prepared for burial. The unsettling past would soon manifest in terrifying ways for the Snedkers. The Snedeker family, mother Carmen, father Alan, had 4 children, Philip, Bradley, Alan Jr., and Jennifer. Shortly after moving in, Carmen's nieces were having trouble at home, and they asked to come stay with the Snedkers, and Carmen happily invited them into their home. So we had the addition of 2 nieces, Tammy and Kimberly Elvis. So in the house, we have 2 adults and 6 children. When they moved in, they discovered different things down in the basement. There was an elevator for bringing up coffins. There was a blood drainage pit. And there was different little things that you would see in a funeral home for sale. And this is when they realized that they were living in a funeral home. They couldn't back out of the lease at this point without incurring major costs, which they really couldn't afford. So they decided they would make do with what they have and stay put. But shortly after moving in, the children began to experience a series of disturbing paranormal events. They reported strange noises, cold spots, objects moving on their own, kids even seeing shadow figures and full apparitions down in the basement where the mortuary was. The atmosphere in the house grew increasingly oppressive, and the children in particular were affected. Carmen was actually in denial, and she believed that her son may have been hallucinating from the cancer treatments, and she thought that he was influencing the other children into believing this and trying to scare them. Everything came to a head, however, when Philip attacked one of his cousins and tried to steal a gun from a neighbor to kill his father. In response, Carmen ended up sending Philip away to a psychiatric facility, and as he was being taken away, he screamed at her that now the family won't be protected and it would start attacking them. And that's exactly what happened. Carmen's niece one night came into the parents' room screaming that the entity was assaulting her again. That's when Carmen saw a hand moving under her niece's shirt. She called a local priest who told them to pray and call him back in the morning. Soon, Carmen began to be attacked as well. One time, she was in the shower when the shower curtain wrapped around her and began suffocating her. It was a very scary scene, and her niece had to rescue her from the shower curtain. As well, and this is the shocking part of the story of A Haunting in Connecticut, I need to give a trigger warning for SA from a ghost. It's a little bit odd, but it's going to come up a lot, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a trigger warning. The entity, as they called it, began to SA the whole family as well. And this was quite a shocking part of the story for 1992, you have to remember. And that really put the family over the edge, and in their desperation, the Snedkers sought help from paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, who were known for their work with haunted locations and demonic possessions. Upon investigating the home, the Warrens confirmed the family's fears, stating that the house was indeed haunted by multiple spirits, and one in particular was the malevolent entity that was attacking the family. Another trigger warning, and this is going to come up again in this case. If this stuff is too much for you, definitely feel free to click off the video. I don't know what to call this trigger warning. Assaulting dead bodies? Lorraine also said that someone was defiling the bodies that were coming into the funeral home, and that apparently this was related to the bad energy or entity. I know this part of the story is kind of weird, but it's important to include it because it's going to be part of the stuff that we discussed during the debunking. Eventually, the Warrens ended up getting a priest to be able to exorcise the house. The house was successfully exorcised, and 6 days later, the family moved out, and they haven't had any issues since. So, that is a very summarized version of the story because we're going to be spending quite a bit of time on the other information. So if you want to hear all the details of the story, feel free to read the book. It's called In a Dark Place, or check out the movie. I think it was 2009 movie. But let's carry on. Was it all just a hoax? There is hours upon hours of podcasts, interviews, TV shows, also written interviews as well, and I've caught so much inconsistencies in them that I understand the quote that is said most about this case by the author of the first book, Ray Garton. That being said, it's a little bit difficult to split up all the information. I was going to do it chronologically, but the inconsistencies in the statements overlap in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tackle things based on each key piece of evidence that point towards this being a hoax. First, we're going to start with the book because I think that sets the tone for this whole thing. In a Dark Place by Ray Garton and Ed Warren. So the haunting in the case happened, it was released around 1988. After the family moved out, that's when Ray Garton started working on the book. That's when he was hired to write a book. There's a lot of issues when he was writing the book, which we will get into. But the book was called In a Dark Place, and it was released in 1992. Now, I believe that this is the best starting off point because this whole case comes into question because of what he said in 2009. So in 2009, Ray Garton came forward with his truth on what happened during the time he was writing In a Dark Place. Garton was he was a fiction writer. He wrote horror stories that weren't true. So when he was hired to write a nonfiction story, he was really excited. And his contract did say that this would be a nonfiction work. So he was really excited. He started investigating it and he was excited to try something new. His reasoning for coming forward, I couldn't really corroborate this, but I don't see Ray as a credit anywhere on the films that were released. So I suspect that he came forward with his story because he wasn't asked to work on the movie and he probably didn't get royalties for the movie. And this is the 2009 Hollywood movie. This wasn't a made-for-TV movie because there was a made-for-TV movie in 2002. I have no idea if he was paid for it. Chances are he probably wasn't because the Warrens had other authors who came forward saying that their contracts with Ed made it so that they made no money off movies too. He wasn't the first author to end up in this situation with the Warrens. So this is why I think he kind of came forward to expose everything. So What did Ray expose about the story? Well, he said, and I quote, "The family involved, which was going through some serious problems like alcoholism and drug addiction, could not keep their story straight, and I became very frustrated. It's hard writing a nonfiction book when all the people involved are telling you different stories. When I went to Ed, he said, they're crazy. All the people that come to us are crazy. That's why they come to us. Use what you can and make the rest up. You write scary books, right? That's why we hired you. So just use what you can and make the rest up and make sure it's scary." For those of you that maybe pay attention, that's kind of an iconic quote. A lot of people do repeat that quite a bit about this case. Ray did go on to say, "I talked to a couple of other writers who'd written books for the Warrens, and their experiences were almost identical to mine. They said they were told to make up whatever they needed to make up and to make it scary. Ed and Lorraine Warren were frauds who passed off the fiction they fabricated as truth and as real events." Now, as well, like I said, for the other author situation too, in my original Warren's Exposed video, I talk about the author Gerald Brittle. He was the author of The Demonologist, which covered the Conjuring cases. He also thought that he was going to be included in making the movies, helping with the script, and he was at least going to get royalties, and he didn't. And I did talk about that in the original video that I did too. So this is a second author. I mean, Brittle came forward after Ray, but point is, there's multiple authors who are sort of complaining about the same thing. It shows a pattern. Now, someone new on the board here with this story, I have to introduce this new character to our little saga of the Warrens, and his name is John Zaffis. I never actually heard of him before. Then I heard that the guy who did Ghost Adventures, the Taps guy, Jason Hawes, while I was researching this, he said that John Zaffis was like a really important person in his life that helped him like build his paranormal career. So I had no idea about that. What is important is John Zaffis is Ed Warren's nephew. So in 1988, he decided that he wanted to do what Ed did for a living. And the Haunting in Connecticut case was his first case to learn the ropes. And he's going to come up again a few times in this story. So that's why it's important that we bring him up and I introduce you to who he is and his connection to the Warrens. Zaffis made a couple responses towards Ray. Let's take a look at the first clip I have here.
He wasn't really paying attention. He was going back and forth. He was making extremely derogatory remarks, and I had no clue why this gentleman was even reacting like this. It was totally bizarre to me.
So that was John Zaffis, who just was talking about Ray Garton. So now I need to ask John, why didn't you tell your uncle back then how bad this guy was? You only said something after he came out and outed the story in 2009. You didn't have a problem with Ray until he said something. If he was really that bad and that rude on site, why didn't you bring it up? And then they could have shut him down. In my opinion, I think it's because this is baloney. But anyway, I'll let you decide what you think about that one. Then the second statement that John made was to a news outlet. He said about Ray, he's an author and he seems to have a lot of difficulty with this book. If all of us lied, why would he go forward with the book? Why would he not contact his agent or attorney? Why would he print that it's a true story on the front cover of the book? This question actually gets asked by a lot of people, and it took me a little bit of digging, but I did find Ray's answer to it. So Ray did respond, and he said, once I realized the whole thing was a scam, a complete lie that had been whipped up for the sole purpose of selling to the public as a true story in the form of a book and maybe a movie, I didn't like the fact that my name was going to be on it. But I'd already signed the contract, and to get out of it would have required attorneys and legal fees that I simply could not afford at the time. That is fair. Honestly, he wasn't really that big of a writer. Like, yeah, he was popular, but he didn't have tons of money. It wasn't like Stephen King money. And it does cost a lot to get out of these contracts. And the Warrens had money, so it would have been quite a legal battle to go through. And it probably would have blacklisted him as well when he's an author that's trying to kind of build up still. And Garton was asked a little bit about Philip, because he did hear that Philip was into recreational drugs, which we are going to get into. But Garton said, I was allowed to talk to him, Philip, on the phone briefly, but as soon as he started telling me that the things he saw in the house all went away once he was put on the proper medication, Carmen abruptly ended the conversation. As far as Snedeker nieces being touched by an unseen hand, that turned out to have been caused by the Snedeker's son, Philip, as well. He confessed to the police that he had touched the girls as they slept. So yeah, that's a big statement. And we're going to circle back to that. There is more to that. We are going to get into it. But first, let's wrap up the rest of this book controversy with Ray Garden. So Ray also said regarding John Zaffis and how he was involved in the case, he was around back when I was working on the book. He didn't do much, he just stood around. Lorraine told me he was learning the business. He told me a story about something he saw in the former funeral home, some kind of fully formed demon or some such nonsense. Which, if you do look into John's recollection of that house, he does talk about seeing something like a black shape and hearing fluttering wings or something along those lines. I'm not going to put it in his whole statement because it's too long, because we have a big long statement to finish this off. So this is a bit of a long one. I apologize. But Ray continues to say, during my stay in Connecticut, Ed, Lorraine, and Zaffis repeatedly told me they had a videotape of supernatural activity that they'd shot inside the demon-infested former funeral home, which I never got to visit because the current owners claimed the Snedkers were full of it and wanted nothing to do with the Warrens. They, the Warrens, assured me I would see the footage. Throughout my visit, they kept telling me the videotape was coming, that they were having trouble finding it, but they'd show it to me. By the end of my visit, there had been no sign of any videotape. After my experience with the Warrens, I talked to a couple other writers who'd written books for Ed and Lorraine, and their stories are nearly identical to mine as well. That will come up again later. I know that was a long quote, but this evidence is going to come up again later. All right, so that's the drama surrounding the book. So in my personal opinion, this coupled with some of the evidence that I'm going to get into really does make me actually believe everything Ray is saying here. But let me know what you think. If you want to let me know what you think now, go for it. Drop it in the comments. If you want to wait and hear the rest, wait and hear the rest. I'm happy to see your comment before and after too, if you want to kind of do that for me too. That might be kind of fun. But up next, we're going to take a look at Philip. Philip Snedeker. So in the story, this is all true. Philip was the eldest son. He is the one diagnosed with cancer, and he was the first one to see an apparition and experience paranormal activity. He was very sick though, and his mother, I think, was on the right track of suspecting his medications were making him hallucinate. I don't know if she got sidetracked by money or something. I'm not sure. Her statement says that she asked the radiation doctor if the cobalt treatments would give him hallucinations, and he said no. But there's other medications involved when you have cancer. It's not just radiation. So before we go into specifics about Philip and his character, because that's a whole bag of worms, let's talk a little bit more about cancer itself and treatments and other medications. I dug and dug. I was really trying to find something. I could not find exactly what meds Philip was on. All that his mother says is cobalt radiation treatment. In 1986, the radiation treatment was a new therapy. It's common practice now. But back then, this was an experimental treatment. That is why they were driving him so far, was for this experimental treatment. So she didn't say anything about chemo, but in a future documentary, one of his brothers does say that Philip was on chemo as well.
Transport my brother back and forth to his chemo.
There could be a chance that he misspoke there because he does talk about the transport, and we do know that they're transporting him for the radiation treatment. But he was probably on chemo first. I don't really know all the details of his meds. But if he was on chemo, because it is pretty common that you do chemo with radiation, depending on the severity of the cancer. In the research I did, Philip's cancer was very treatable. He might have just been fine with radiation alone, but radiation also causes a lot of pain and body issues too. But let's first talk about chemo. One of the side effects of chemo is hallucinations. But what about the other pills and things that he was taking? What anti-nausea meds was he on? Because he would have been on something, right? Meds to help his appetite. Also, what pain meds was he on? Radiation and chemo, either one of them together or alone, they pretty much are like killing cells in your body. It hurts. he had to have been on pain medication. There's no way that he wasn't on pain meds. And opiates, they can definitely cause hallucinations. And we're talking, this is 1986. This was around the time when doctors were overprescribing. This was the time of the birth of the opiate crisis. And even though in 1986, this was exactly the year when the WHO put out recommended prescribing guidelines for opiates, it still takes years for all countries to fall in line with WHO recommendations. So there's a really good chance that he was being prescribed opiates. And even with the WHO guidelines, which I'll put on the screen, he may have been put into the moderate amount of opiates depending on the pain, because this was a new treatment and he might have been experiencing quite a bit of pain because they didn't really understand radiation yet, radiation treatments. So all these meds that Philip was on, apparently he was also taking recreational drugs, many different kinds, but one especially, he was taking LSD. So my point is, this kid was really drugged up and he could have been seeing all sorts of stuff. Plus, he was living in a funeral home while he was grappling with his own mortality. That's just a complete hot mess there. And there's multiple reports, and even his own mother said that Philip did influence the rest of the kids very easily. He liked being the center of attention, and kids kind of jumped on board with whatever he was saying and doing. So he was like the ringleader, and if he was hallucinating, he's running a circus, well, he's flying high. But let me play you a few clips regarding his drug use.
Had cancer and he was taking many drugs.
Yes.
Did he or did he not tell you that he was also taking other illegal substances?
I'm aware that he did take other illegal
Because
substances.
he used to come over to our house and tell us that whatever we wanted, we could get. The point I was trying to make was that some of the drugs he was taking would allow him to see things.
Hallucinogenic?
Exactly. LSD.
This Sally Jesse Raphael interview was in 1992. I'm going to play you a clip from a documentary that was made in 2009 where Carmen completely denies knowing anything about her son doing drugs, where she clearly seems to have known about it in the last clip. So I don't know.
My son said he was a drug addict. I can't fathom that. I can understand demons better than I can that.
I'm aware that he did take other illegal
Because
substances.
he used to come over.
I just want to throw in that part about Carmen because, this is just one of many things where you're going to see inconsistencies in things she's saying over the years. All right, now, what about Philip's stay in the psychiatric facility? There's some question whether it was a psychiatric facility or whether it was juvenile. Might have been a juvenile facility, like jail, but then he went to a psych facility. There's a bit of a story here. His family will say it happened because he attacked his cousin, which, yes, he did attack her. And it was just a physical altercation because as time was going on, Philip was becoming more angry at the world. Obviously, look at the crap he's dealing with. But apparently, once they put him in the police cruiser, he then went and confessed to the police that he had been inappropriately touching his cousins. One of them who is young. And a lot of people said that was the thing that put it over the edge as to why he was sent in that night. That he wasn't committed that night, that he was sent into a juvenile facility, like a jail. The family says that he was committed for 45 days until he got better. I don't know. There seems to be some playing up the facts, I think, to make him seem a little bit better. So this is where some people question whether the attack from the entity, whether it was an entity, like a ghost or unseen thing, or if it was just Philip. And this entity story was the family coping, or this was just their way of covering Philip's actions so that he's not tainted in the eyes of people because he got caught doing inappropriate things to his cousins.
Some sources say that Philip had admitted to the police that he had been assaulting the others, and maybe a story about the ghost was simply easier to accept.
Philip, named Stephen in the text, was caught his cousins and was questioned by police afterwards. This led to Philip admitting that this was not the first time he had acted inappropriately with his female relatives. According to the book, Philip admitted to having performed such heinous acts habitually, in secret at night, without being caught, and that he even once attempted unsuccessfully to sleep with his cousin. After this shocking admission, Philip was taken to a juvenile detention center where a psychiatrist diagnosed him as schizophrenic. That Philip admitted to having committed obscenities similar to those attributed to the demonic entities said to reside in the family's home is hard to ignore. It could be said that rather than being attacked by unseen supernatural creatures, the family were instead being by Philip, and that their fantastical claims were invented as a form of psychological coping mechanism.
Since we're already in the thick of it, let's get through the unsavory parts of this case, the strange SUL claims. Unsettling story. Alright, to start, let's talk about the entity. The family all liked calling this thing the entity, and they go into great detail about how this entity essayed them. In particular, the mother Carmen and the cousin/niece Tammy tell stories that exactly match scenes from the movie The Entity. The movie has a scene with the shower curtain that matches Carmen's shower curtain story. And I'm not going to post a clip of Carmen's stories because they're way too graphic for YouTube. And I'm not going to link the Entity movie either because it's vile, in my opinion. If you are curious, just Google the Entity movie grape scene, if you know what I mean, and then listen to Carmen's explanation. It's very spot on. It's like they copied the movie. I didn't actually really realize this. I was too young. I don't think I even seen this Entity movie. When I watched The Current Affair, they made this connection and I'm like, holy cow, it does. And I went and found the clips of the Entity movie and I was like, yeah, this exactly matches what they're saying. So let me play you the little clip from The Current Affair show. And apologies, I am going to play clips from this show, but this is the only quality that we can find. It's literally the only copy on the internet. It is what it is for quality. Apologies. This is from the 80s. This is from 88.
And the clue, the use of the word entity by both Carmen and Tammy, both of whom admit their affection for the movie of the same name.
Well, have you ever seen the movie Entity? It's more or less like that movie, yeah, but it doesn't care. You can be stabbing and, you get right in there.
In this film, Barbara Hershey's character is attached almost identically to the description by Carmen of her own experiences.
They'll walk all the way around your feet, walk up next to you, slap you. And you can have your arm in front of your face, and the slap can go through your arm and hit you in the face.
And that's when I went and Googled the full clips and I watched them. They're very disturbing, but very identical to the story that the girls are telling. So that's the entity part. Now let's talk about the next weird claim in this story, and that's the desecrating corpses, if you know what I mean. There are inconsistencies in this story. First, Carmen, the mother, says that Philip was writing poems about it in his journal before the Warrens showed up. This is also corroborated by the niece/cousin Tammy. So Philip wrote about blankphilia.
What was Philip writing? I know he was writing words down. I've seen a picture on one of the documentaries. What was he writing and drawing?
It was about being intimate with a dead body.
Wow.
So Carmen first says that Philip was writing about that, but then the story changes to Lorraine sensed it when she showed up.
She picked up lots of things in the house, and she told me that she thought that there had been some pedophilia that went on. And
now, I mean, if you want to believe that Lorraine is clairvoyant or whatever, you can believe that. I have a feeling there's something a little bit more to how Lorraine knew this. But next, with this as well, Carmen goes on to say that Philip was illiterate and that he couldn't read or write. So he was writing that stuff in his journal, but apparently he couldn't read or write. And she tries to, I guess, imply that this is supernatural in some way.
Philip was dyslexic.
Wow.
So he could not read or write.
This is all in the same interview. I don't know. Maybe she misspoke or something, but it doesn't look good. Because a past interview as well, his cousin said that Philip wrote a lot and that he would always get her to read his notebooks. And he was a very avid writer.
He had a journal or a notebook that he would write poems and letters and notes, and just he would jot anything down, and a lot of it was really dark and enough to make me go to my Aunt Carm in regards and worry.
Just so you understand, all these clips, I'm trying to show you guys the inconsistencies that come from the family. And this is what Ray was saying when he was trying to write this book, is that the family's stories didn't line up, and he had concerns about that, because if stories don't line up, then they're probably not true. This is one of many examples. We're going to get into some more as well. Also reported on AssociatedContent.com. I found this in a few places and it all linked back to this website. I don't know. I'm going to read you the quote. It says, Carmen later reported that the former workers were found guilty of this crime of doing that to the deceased people, although we are unable to find documentation regarding this claim. So like, people that wrote this article tried to look into it and they couldn't find documentation of it. The article didn't really provide documentation of where she said this, but she talks so much and does so many interviews. It might be in one of the many dozens of interviews I didn't listen to because I can only take so much. And that's a problem. And we're going to talk about this again, but soapbox for a minute. The people who owned the house before this, their family was still like around. Like you're ruining and disparaging the name of a family. It's messed up. But this classic warns anyway. All right. I don't really want to keep talking about all this vile stuff. It's kind of gross and it's a weird part of this case, but hopefully you're seeing the issues that I saw. And I mean, the only reason I really talk about it is, like, I think Philip may have been abusing his family. If any of this was true, if they had weird feelings or whatever, if it wasn't just a money grab from the beginning, I think it may be that this was a family's way of coping with what Philip did to them, or the way of covering for Philip. I don't know, but that it does have an important aspect of the case to understand what Philip was doing to the people in his family.
Being minus the whole way.
Let's move on. Let's talk about the house. The new home. All right, so the family moves into this new home. How did they find out about the place being a funeral home? Again, we get multiple stories. The first story is they figured it out by looking around the place and finding the items left behind.
When I first came in the house, my brother was showing me some of the weird things, like the room where they made the headstones and the footstones and the body lifts, and that's kind of how we were putting things together, that it was a funeral home.
When we first discovered it was a funeral home, I went to the landlord and I discussed it with him. We would have lost the money we put down for deposit the first month's rent had we have backed out.
So that was the first story, is that when they showed up and they were looking around, and there's other written stories. This is just a video one, but there's other written stories where Carmen's like, oh, we saw the crucifixes in all of the walkways and entrances, and we started piecing together that something looked a bit odd, and oh, these curtains looked a bit odd, and oh, and then we found the stuff in the basement, and that's when we figured out it was a funeral home. So there's obviously like more to that story, but this was the video clip I just threw in. Now the next story is Carmen had a nightmare before they all got there, and she had a nightmare that she rented a funeral home.
I had a nightmare. And in that nightmare, I woke up and I grabbed my ex-husband's arm and I said, I've just rented a funeral home. And he said, well, what makes you think that? I said, I dreamt it.
Wow.
And I was a big believer in dreams, and he thought I was silly. He said, no, you and your dreams.
Now, I have a feeling that this whole nightmare thing was her confession, slightly. I do think that she knew what she was renting. She knew it was a funeral home. She just didn't tell her family. And this her like having a dream thing was her going, oh no, it did come true, you know? Because the landlord has always insisted that Carmen was told it was a funeral home from the beginning before she signed anything. In a newspaper clipping here, it says the landlord, Daryl Kern, he insisted, you know, she always knew. And then he also says, it's a fraud, it's a joke, it's a hoax, it's Halloween. Let's talk a little bit more about this too. There was apparently also a sign outside saying Hallahan Funeral Home. Carmen insists it was covered by plywood. Numerous neighbors say it wasn't, but one neighbor came forward and said that it was covered. So I'm not really going to spend much time on the sign thing because mainly the argument I watched was on Sally Jesse Raphael, and I do recommend that you go watch that whole episode, and it will be linked to my references. It just shows you the absurdness of this whole case watching that episode. It's just like so much yelling. But I just want to point out another thing too. They lived there for 2 years before they complained about ghosts. The landlord, Daryl Kern, he said that the paranormal activity seemed to have conveniently escalated around around the time that the Snedkers started getting behind on their rent, and that they moved out before the eviction proceedings were complete. And this was in the Hartford Courant newspaper, October 30th, 92. Yvonne, another neighbor, also corroborated that they were behind on rent.
No, we were not behind in our rent.
Yvonne, you were saying it was for money. Why?
Yes, that's what it is. Even the landlord said they got behind it. He never had a problem until they got behind in the rent. Then all of a sudden,
the landlord knew there was a problem with that house.
No, the landlord.
Yes. If the landlord said there was a problem in the house,
That's his daughter.
There was a lady living.
Some more yelling happens in that, so I won't play for too long. The most damning of all is the house was a duplex, and there was a lady who lived upstairs. The lady who lived upstairs was the real estate agent who worked with the landlord, and she actually helped set up the family in this house. And she says that they knew, or that Carmen knew, because she was there when Carmen was signing the papers. Carmen knew that it was a funeral home before moving in. It was made very clear to her. As well, the neighbor upstairs did not experience anything supernatural.
Clearly express their views on the supposed haunting. They claim they didn't know it was a funeral home when they moved in.
Totally incorrect. I work at the real estate place where the owner of the real estate place also owns this house, and these people are well aware. I worked there during the time when this woman came to rent it. She was totally made aware that she was told that this was a funeral home.
You're also saying there are difficulties with the rent?
That's correct. They're back 2 months, and this month was not paid. She let that statement out to the paper, to a reporter.
What possible purpose then is this manifestation?
Money.
And, one last little tidbit as well I want to add into here, because I don't really know which area to put this in. Carmen, in yet another lie, she tried to substantiate the haunting by saying that police were there and witnessed something. Here's the clip.
Hi, I was wondering what the police thought when you told them that.
The policeman almost shut my bedroom door when the door began to open by itself when he was in there.
All right, so she says the police were there at her house for like this haunting or whatever. But someone did a bit of digging on this, and here's the official police records of the calls to that property during the time that they lived there.
We were at the home approximately about 8 times back in 1988. During that time, we were at the home for, we had a prowler complaint, we had a minor juvenile complaint, suspicious person, trouble with neighbor, harassment, and some type of theft. So there's no ghost calls here, no apparition type of calls.
I'm just going to pause it here because I want to point out something. So here we have the date, 1988. Okay. They left before 89. So we have, okay, minor juvenile, that's fine, suspicious person. Here we go. Landlord-tenant dispute. Then there's a neighbor trouble, and then landlord-tenant dispute. Now they're trying to say that they weren't behind on their rent, and they were trying to say, no, they weren't being evicted. But there's a landlord-tenant dispute, 2 calls. I feel like this kind of backs up the landlord saying that he was having issues with them and he was trying to get them evicted. They did the exorcism on the home on September 6, 1988. The landlord-tenant dispute, the first call is in August 29th. The second one is in November, so it's hard to say on that one whether it was them. Maybe an issue came up or they came to get some stuff or something, or maybe it was the new tenant. But the people who moved in after them were on the Sally Jessica Raphael show, and they didn't seem to have problems. So I have a feeling it might be they came back to the property for something and a situation happened. But that's just guessing. But definitely there was a landlord-tenant dispute call put in during the time that they were trying to evict them as well. So this is just further proof. So they said that they left 6 days after the exorcism, and the landlord said that they left right before he was about to get the eviction finalized. And if he got the eviction finalized and if they were evicted, that wouldn't have gone well for their story. So the Warrens probably rushed them out of the house because then you could sell the story better. They were being coached by the Warrens along the way, you have to realize, right? Once they brought the Warrens in, things were very calculated with what they released to the press, how they released things, and their actions and what they did. All right, so let me end this section with some quotes from their neighbors. This is the landlord's wife is quoted as saying, "Personally, my husband and I do not believe in ghosts, and to us the whole issue seems ridiculous. I find it ironic that after more than 2 years as tenants, suddenly we're told about these alleged ghosts and then read in the paper that the Warrens will be conducting a seminar and will be charging the public for it. If the ghosts are really there, then why did the Snedkers stay there for over 2 years, and why are they staying there now? Are they looking for publicity or profit or what?" The next quote is from the upstairs neighbor, and she said about the Warrens that they are con artists, and she goes on to say, "I haven't experienced anything. I definitely know that no one has been graped up here. The Warrens, I am convinced, were exploiting the situation for personal gain, and they have caused a lot of problems here, and they are not ghost problems." So let me ask you, if this was your family being attacked by an unseen entity, what would be the first thing that you would do? I'd immediately leave. And Carmen was asked about this many times, so let's get into that. Why didn't you move out? This will be a short section. I just want to include it to show further inconsistencies in the stories that Carmen tells everyone. Each time Carmen's asked this question on why didn't they move out, she has a different answer and she spins it differently. So the first clip is the oldest one that we have here is 1988, and this is from the Current Affair coverage.
But it's told my husband it will kill our son.
Why haven't you just taken your children, which must be your most dear concern, and left this house?
Where would we go? Children need stability.
Even if it's going to kill them?
Hopefully it won't kill them.
Hopefully, good fortune will smile on this house in the near future.
Okay, so the first one, she says stability. Then in 1992, on Sally Jesse Raphael show, she talks about it following them.
Carmen, I have to ask you, why did you just pick up your family and leave?
Sally, that would have been the first choice we would have had, but every time we did leave the house, it would follow us. I'd go to work, and the computer system would go down, and the phone system would go down. The people at work are the ones that gave me the phone number to the people that finally helped me. My husband went to work. His car, he parked and went inside the building. As he did, the car started back up and drove into the building.
Then in a 2002 interview that she was doing to promote the upcoming movie, she goes on to say that she didn't know the haunting was happening, so she didn't know to leave.
Okay, if all this was going on, you say you stayed in the home a couple of years? Why?
Well, this is at the end. When I got involved, I mean, the kids were the only ones being tormented in the beginning, and I was unaware of it. It would hide from me, because they'd say, okay, there's a little boy skipping through this room, and I'd go in there, and there would be nobody there.
You said it would hide from me.
It, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it, an entity, a spirit, it's been called so many things.
I'll just point out with that interview compared to the Sally Jesse Raphael, if she didn't know the haunting was happening and if that's why they didn't leave, then why in the Sally Jesse Raphael interview is she saying that it followed them wherever they went? If she didn't know about it, then how would it be following them? And if she didn't know about it, and it was there for 2 years and she didn't know about it, and it only started attacking them at work in the last few months, I don't know, it seems a little bit weird. In 2009, though, she decides to combine all of her previous answers into one culmination. She was called out on this particular question quite a lot, so I think that's why she decided to combine everything together.
A lot of people have asked me why I didn't just leave the house when things got really crazy and I understood what was going on. Well, there were several reasons. One, we couldn't financially afford to just run off. And in a home, there is security and safety, even if there's chaos inside.
But we were also told that if we just packed up and moved, there was a chance that whatever was in the house could follow us or be attached to us.
Leaving the house never solved the problem. I tried several times to go to the movies, to be a normal teenager, hang out with my friends, and things would happen, horrible things. People would be slapped or moved or touched, and they didn't know, but I knew because of what we'd already been through in the house, and I eventually got to the point to where I didn't want to go anywhere.
So, and this one's kind of weird coming from the kids, because the one kid says, if we packed up and moved, we were told that it was just going to follow us, which makes me think the Warrens gave them that information to kind of play into the press and into the story. But then the niece cousin girl there, she says that she saw her friends being attacked at the movie theater. I think a lot of things were being influenced by the Warrens at this point. In case you didn't really get me kind of showing you how much Carmen gets caught in inconsistencies, aka a nice way to say that she lies a lot, let me show you a few more clips. In this first clip, she says that her nieces came to stay with her because her sister was ill. But the kids go on to say, actually, no, it was because our parents were getting divorced and the house was like really unstable where they were. They felt unsafe, and that's why they came to stay with their aunt. So I'll play these for you.
In the meantime, my sister found out that she was ill, and I took on two of her daughters. One was 13 and one was 18, and they came to live with us as well.
My family had my parents were going through a divorce, and just Aunt Carmen was always through the years kind of like a second mom, and she knew that we were going through hard times, and she just called, and it was set up that fast, just come up and stay, we've got room. Great.
And just a couple more clips that I found interesting.
I believe Carmen has convinced herself that there's ghosts.
Maybe they believe that happened. Maybe the Snedkers think that this happened in the home. If that's what they believe, then I'm sorry that they had to go through that. Because I don't believe it happened.
I definitely take comfort in not believing. It helps me sleep better at night.
And the things that happened and that happened over a 2-year period, I could tell you a story every day and tell you something new that you wouldn't recognize, that you'd heard brand new. I could tell you a story every day.
Now, just remember, I sat through like hours of listening to interviews and reading articles of interviews and quotes and everything. I'm pulling out pieces of this stuff because I don't want this episode to go on for like 10 hours. If you want to further look into this, I encourage you to go watch everything, go listen to everything, go read everything if you're so inclined to do so. Otherwise though, if you want to leave a comment, let me know, what do you think about Carmen? So a lot of people say, why do they lie? I get that comment a lot on my videos. A lot of people in the comments say, why would a family or person lie? Why would they put their family through this? Why would they put themselves through this? All this grief and pain. Trust me, there's always a reason, and it can differ from anywhere from money to like attention to just kind of like peer pressure. Like there's a bunch of different reasons, but in this particular case, let's get into reasons as to why this family would be lying about their haunting. Why the lies? Money. Well, that about sums it up, to be honest. And listen, I get it. This happened in the United States. 100%, like those medical bills had to be piling up. The radiation treatments were a new experimental treatment at the time. There's no way that they got insurance to cover that. And did they even have insurance? Like, we don't have answers to these questions, unfortunately. We don't get to find out the nature of their financial situation. All that we can find out about their financial situation is they're behind on their rent because the landlord corroborated that. But no one else is speaking up about the rest of their financial situation. They were behind on their rent. The father was also living in Texas and commuting into Connecticut on the weekends to see the family, which meant they were maintaining 2 properties. So they were paying rent on 2 properties. They're feeding 6 kids. They had to be struggling. Of course they were struggling. They pulled the classic Warrens move, which is why I can really see the Warrens being like, you can really see the puppet mastering that the Warrens do on these cases. As I look into more and more of these cases, I see the same pattern repeat itself. First, you act like you're not doing this for money to sell the story. Their initial newspaper article that they gave, like their initial interview, they said they weren't going to write a book and they weren't going to make money off of this. They also left out the fact that they were behind on rent. This is a classic Warren tactic. You say you're not going to make money, you come across as more credible when you're not doing it for the money. And at this time, the Warrens were directing them because they didn't go public until the Warrens showed up. So the Warrens were telling them what to do in these press interactions. It's corroborated in many places that the Warrens told them to go public. And then, of course, classic Warrens, they got them to sign one of their Warren book deals, and the usual happened.
They also published that they were not writing a book, and we're not going to write a book.
We weren't at the time, lady.
We sure did.
We insisted that it would be good for them to write a book because people like these out here would know that there is help for them if this ever occurred to them.
You know, there's journal around the clock, but I have...
Another neighbor, Catherine Ultimus, sorry if I say that wrong, stated in an interview that it was her opinion that the Snedkers had this planned right from when they moved in. A Live Science article is also quoted as saying they were aware that the Lutz family of the Amityville Horror profited handsomely from selling the rights to their true story of a haunted house. Now, on this point, I will just say this does show up in a few different websites, but I couldn't corroborate if this was true or just someone putting forth an idea and it becoming fact without backing. Like, I only say this because there's so much proof of the family saying stuff and being caught in lies that this doesn't show up at all anywhere that I found anyway. So it makes me think that this is maybe a statement that was never made or substantiated. But I wanted to add this here for you to decide. You might see this show up on some websites, and I just really couldn't corroborate it for sure. There's a popular skeptic, Joe Nichols, who publishes a lot of articles and investigations that he does, and he said that the upstairs neighbor said that they were getting a third of the profits.
And their upstairs neighbor, remember it's a duplex, claimed that she was told the family was going to get a third of the profits, according to skeptic Joe Nichols' investigation. Again, all hearsay.
Yeah, that's the thing, it's all hearsay. That's all we can go off of, though, you know?
True.
I, of course, have all the links to everyone here. I do recommend checking out the Red Web YouTube channel, and this is a pretty good episode, and it's called The True Story Behind the Snedeker House. They do a pretty good job. After they moved out, after all that happened, and after the book was released, soon movies came to follow. Carmen admits to working with movie producers as well as working on her own book. She says this in an interview where she's plugging the new movie. She would be getting paid by the studio if she's going on news shows and on talk shows to plug a movie. She's getting paid somewhere, and she does say that she worked as a consultant, so she was getting paid.
So there is a book, there is also a documentary, and now there's this film on the big screen. What type of a role did you play with the creation of this film?
In this film, I started with Andy Trapani in 2002, and I worked with the writers, Tim Metcalf and Adam Simon, for a long time before it was ever made with the writing of the script. I mean, we went over every detail that happened. He saw the drawings.
So you're now working with those researchers and writing your own book on some of the items that have been left out of this film. It's only 90 minutes.
Right. I actually am writing the book myself. The researcher, John Zaff, is helping me with some of the details. He's got tapes and things of that nature, and we're co-writing it with each other.
Many years later, Carmen's still working on this book. The researcher, John Zaffis, that she mentioned, that's Ed Warren's nephew. There's no expected data release of when this book is going to come out. And in the interview there, she says that, oh, John Zaffis has some tapes and proof and things like that. And this goes with like the Ray Garton thing and all this evidence is, where's the evidence, you know? So last info I found her talking about her book was about 4 years ago, and she's been writing this book, from what I gather, since like 2009, but then in some interviews she said that she started working on notes for it since like the first book was released and she didn't like it, so that was 92. I have no idea when this book's coming out. I really don't think it's coming out. It's been way too long. But we'll see. We'll see if she ends up releasing it. All right, now this whole story is a ton of info, I know. More than I usually like to include because I like to be more concise, but I felt all these things I chose to include were really important to point out. And there's stuff I left out. There's a lot of stuff I left out. But let's get back into the heart of the reason that I made this series. This video is a part of the Warren series, so let's talk about the Warrens. The Warrens. Alright, I have to talk about one of the unpleasant things again. I apologize, but the desecration of the bodies that went into the funeral home to have a funeral. This one seems weird. Either Lorraine saw the notebooks or Carmen told her about them and they just decided to spin it that Lorraine picked up on it happening. I don't know if I mentioned it in my first video, but there's a bunch of documentation of like Lorraine talking about how she was never a believer and she wasn't a believer until like a few cases in or something with Ed. But then she changed her story to suddenly that she's been clairvoyant ever since she was 6 or 7. So like, I don't believe that she's clairvoyant because there's that original story before she came out with the new spin story that was out, and that was before they were hunting demons. That was when they were ghost hunting. So it was a different story she used to tell. Further to that, my issue with this story, my issue in general with this whole thing, her son may have been doing that poetry. Send your son to psych, like immediately take him to a psychiatrist. Poetry about that is like weird. It's not good for a teenage boy to be writing about that stuff. Maybe he's writing about it because he sees himself as a corpse or something, but this is why you would send him to a therapist. Don't like call a demonologist to come hunt ghosts in your house. My point is, sorry, I got on a rant. This sullies the name of the family who owned the funeral home. Once again, the Warrens, they don't care who they drag through the mud, whatever it takes to make a buck. If her son was writing this stuff, you know, the Warrens were the ones who chose to make sure that the newspapers heard about this. Make sure that you put this spin on it, that this ghost was doing these horrible sexual things to the family, and then you put the spin of what was happening to these bodies. So it becomes this big shock factor. But this family, this Hallahan family, still existed. They were still in the community. The community still loved them and everything, and you're ruining their name. Like, it's not right to be doing that to somebody. This also goes in, and I mean, I'm gonna rant about this when I do the Conjuring video, but the Bathsheba thing, like, people go and they like break her like gravestone constantly because they blame her for the haunting, and she had nothing to do with the Conjuring house. This is the kind of stuff that really bothers me about the Warrens. Okay, I'm ranting. Next thing, the church. This is like all over the place with this case. Like, the Warrens are saying they're trying to get the church to come exorcise the place, and the church wouldn't help out, and that's why they went public, is to force the church to come exorcise the place, because if they go public and the church has more pressure on them to come help a family, and that's why the family essentially went public with the story. And then shortly after that, then an exorcism was performed by an unnamed priest, and after that exorcism was performed, the haunting was just over, and then the family moved out 6 days after. Like, so weird. I'm gonna get into some other clips about the priest and a few. First, the next thing I want to talk about is the Warrens, the way that they just throw families aside. Okay, yeah, they threw that family's name through the mud with that story, but then they did just turn their back on the Snedkers like they do with all their clients. The family was really mad about the stuff that was in the book that Ray Garton wrote. I don't know if any of it was inaccurate. I feel like if it was complete lies, that they'd just be able to sue for that, so I think there was accuracy in it. But they didn't want that stuff published, like the stuff about him, well, that is actually on record about him, you know, doing inappropriate things with his cousins in their sleep. They obviously didn't want that out there, so they were really upset about the book. So I want to put in a few clips about that, because I do feel like some of this may be hamming up for the camera a bit, but even regardless if it's the Snedkers, pick another family that the Warrens left high and dry and just like feel the emotion that could be behind that about what happens when you do this to a family.
The Warrens encouraged us to go public. Basically, they said that it would get the church in quicker, that the church hated publicity.
Because, see, there's certain protocol where the Catholic Church is concerned.
And I really didn't trust that, per se. But my husband was really getting tired of all the people being in the house. And he said, well, if this will get it over faster, fine, go public. And that's what happened. And I don't think that he understood the ramifications. I know I didn't, of what going public would do to our children.
Are placed by Ray Garton.
I didn't want any part of it. And they wouldn't remove any word. Not one word that I wanted removed did they remove. I had no editorial rights to it whatsoever. My story wasn't my story any longer once I signed on the dotted line. I was so angry at this point that I disconnected from the Warrens and everyone else, and we just moved to Tennessee, and I disconnected from them all. I wanted nothing further to do with them. I saw what kind of people they were. They wanted to use my story to get their own notoriety.
Tonight's program will be about the haunted funeral home.
They didn't really care what happened to my children, or me, or my husband, or whether we ever came through this alive, dead, or whatever.
It's just it was another case for us. They were a nice family. They stuck together. That was very important. No, we just moved right on.
In my opinion, I do think that Carmen lies a lot, but those clips together, I think, tell the story of the aftermath that the Warrens leave behind. Look at the video I did on The Devil Made Me Do It. That is how I feel like that family, like the brothers, that's the raw emotion, and that's how they felt. And I do think that there's a portion of that Carmen felt too, because once you sell your life story to the Warrens, like, it's out of your hands. sense. And she was very angry about that. I'd be angry about that too. So I totally understand that. I know it's more of an emotional set of clips, and we're going to hop back into some more clips. But if you need to take a moment to decompress, just pause, breathe, and now we're going to continue on with some more. All right. I want to talk about Ed. We got a few things. Ed's anger. There's a whole video I'd like to do on this, but I have no proof of things, whatever. So a reporter, this goes back to the priest. The current affair, the one from 1988, asked to talk with the priest, and Ed just flew off the handle, as he usually does. The reporter said, "Oh, do you not want to build any credibility in this case?" And then he just like kind of told him off.
I asked for the name of a priest who the Warrens claim had visited the house. We wanted to speak to him as an independent source.
There is no priest, there is no this, there is no that. What is this? Because of this mud up here almost raining down? Hey, this is baloney. Come on.
I'd like to discuss it some more if we can.
I'm not discussing anything.
I think the credibility is good at stake. We contacted the priest named. He wouldn't appear on camera, but said there were no plans for an exorcism.
Ed does mention the Sally Jesse Raphael show. If you do watch the whole thing, he says, "Oh, there was a priest that showed up on 2020 or Current Affair or something like that." This was the one that they were talking about. Like, the guys didn't say that they were going to exorcise the house. It was just an initial priest that they were talking to. But point is of this clip is you saw Ed's anger. We're going to see more of Ed's anger. First, Ed's weird accusation that the neighbors are getting paid off by the landlords. You know, he just got to spin it, you know?
Very likely. You're probably one of the guys I chased down the street. I'd like to know how much you especially you are getting paid off by the landlord to do this kind of stuff. Because you know as well as we do that what around in that house actually occurred.
Next clip, we have the skeptic that showed up. He also writes some articles about this, but he shows up in the Sally Jesse Raphael show. And the comments he makes are important. Listen to what the skeptic says about the Warrens and their credibility and everything. Then also watch how Ed reacts too. And this just goes to show you like Ed's anger issues, but also like there's a lot of truth to what this skeptic says.
Joe, you say the investigations the Warrens conducted is baloney. Why?
Well, I've investigated haunted houses for some 20 years and a professional psychologist. Pardon?
Is there such a thing?
I've not met a house that I thought was haunted. I think the Warrens have never met a house that they didn't think was haunted.
I think that you're mistaken.
It's my turn.
You made a statement.
I've heard that you were allowed now to shouting people down. Just give me my chance to talk.
You did that to me last show we were on.
Joe, I'll give you your chance.
You're allowed now, Warren. We all know it, but if you'll just let me finish.
When you're concerned, I'm allowed.
Go ahead,
Try to show a little class.
I don't have a lot of time.
No, I'm not going to class with somebody who's sitting here.
Let
You'll have nothing to find.
Ed, let Joe just explain.
Be careful, you call a liar.
Go ahead.
Guys, Joe, point by point.
Yes, one thing, the houses that sincere people report that they think are haunted usually follow certain patterns. This is a hodgepodge of...
Now, that was Joe Nickel from the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. He does actually publish papers and stuff as well. Well, at least back then, I mean. After that particular interview, Nickel did claim, and I quote, "Ed made veiled threats asides to me, and off stage he swore like a sailor as well." So he was just furthering like that Ed was very aggressive after the taping, like off stage too. One more thing, I want to add in Joe's comments about Amityville in comparison to this case. And you got to remember, the Warrens also worked on Amityville, and just watch how Ed reacts to this.
This is a hodgepodge of the sort of ghost tale, poltergeist, part demon, part this, part that. We saw a similar pattern with the Amityville Horror, a case that the Warrens thought was genuine. It turned out to be a blatant hoax concocted over several bottles of wine. The evidence, yes, I can prove it. Yes, I can. It's been proven. The evidence is very clear in the case of Amityville Horror. The whole packaging of this story, the book says it's for Halloween release. The book was written by a professional fiction writer who writes horror stories. This whole packaging is a crotch.
I think that clip shows a little bit more about Ed. Now, we're going to talk about Ed's nephew again, but before we do that, let's take a look at, there is a investigator who happened to be planted in the audience of Sally Jesse Raphael, who Ed calls out. And I can't read his name tag because the quality's really bad, but like, he looks just like his nephew.
But if you ask the gentleman who's sitting right over there, who spent 9 weeks in the house, what he had also had happened to him, similar attacks.
Where's the gentleman?
Right there.
Yes. What happened to you?
We were there for 9.5 weeks, trying to help Carmen and Snedker. When we go in on these cases,
We have to document.
Who's we?
The researchers. I work with Ed and Lorraine doing their investigating. I'm one of the persons that was in there for the 9.5 weeks. I'm amazed at hearing all these people that weren't even in the home. You weren't there. You weren't witness to it.
And gosh, he has the same stage presence as Ed. So anyway, so Zaphis, Ed's nephew, years later, he said there's definitely documentation, but the production company owns all of it now. And he was referring to like, oh, it's tied up with the movie producers or something along those lines. He says, I do have pictures of us in the house, though. There are definitely pictures. I remember Ray was asking for this like years back when he was writing the book, and now it's tied up in a 2009 movie or something along those lines. So like, it's just, there's always an excuse to not show the evidence. And now, what happened to the evidence? I'm gonna play you a set of clips. You decide what you think about evidence when it comes to the Warrens. This isn't the first time that evidence, they say they have evidence and they can't provide it. It does happen a lot with them.
And then coming back to nephew John Zaphis, he told the New Haven Register that there is video and photographic evidence, but that it belongs to, quote, the production company, which this evidence would seem very substantial if we were to be able to see it, though we don't know what production company or what that evidence contains or where it would be otherwise.
What did the Warrens say whenever they were in your house? Did they find any evidence? I mean, what was going on? What went on that way?
There was psychic evidence. They didn't find a lot of physical evidence.
Of course, yeah.
And with how active the investigators said the house was all the time, you'd think that the reporters would catch things, but...
The family seemed like they were sincere. I talked with them, and I talked with the paranormal who was on location. I had never had anything happen to me at the house, but they tended to have the answer for that. The fact that I was a reporter was the reason why the ghost did never show himself.
And there's other quotes of them saying that some reporters had things happen to them, but their equipment malfunctioned, which is why they didn't have evidence. So, okay, I have a bunch of clips about the priest. I'll just do a little montage about the priest that did the exorcism.
Father Kabbalah, who's been a priest in the Immaculate Conception Church in Southington for 25 years.
About it.
25 years.
Yeah.
And I told, he was a friend of mine, and I said, I'm moving in the Hallahan house. He said, Yvonne, there was never anything there.
That's baloney.
They named in the newspaper as having come in and blessed the house and worked with them, did not go into that house.
I'm sorry?
He had not been in that house since Mrs. Hallahan's funeral.
Of the Chancellery in Hartford.
Yes. How about a name? Just one name.
Father A is a name I give you. I don't have
Give
to
a name. A full name.
According to a newspaper article that I have, the Bridgeport newspaper, the diocese refuses to confirm if they had any exorcism there. If there was an exorcism, I don't understand why there's any reason why they can't come out and say so.
We've had priests on the show when we've talked about exorcism.
Sally looks so annoyed during this whole episode. I wonder how many more haunting episodes she did after this one. I'm kind of curious. To this day, the Warrens still never proved that an exorcism happened at this location. No one has been able to prove that an exorcism happened. And the church still denies, like they say, no exorcism was ever approved. There was a priest that went in, but he said the place doesn't need an exorcism. So, in the end of all this, you know, I did have to leave some things out, so if anything comes up, I'll throw it in the comments and we can talk about it in there. In the end, Philip definitely had some issues. Family was dealing with a lot of problems. But the question is, you know, was there something really there? Was something maybe following him because he was so close to death? And him living inside a funeral home as well, did it trigger something? Was it maybe a small story that got completely out of control when the Warrens showed up? Or was it all a hoax planned to make money? To help pay for medical bills, to help pay to move, and help pay for rent and not to be evicted. I mean, they had 6 children. They might have been desperate to make sure that those kids still had a roof over their head. In the end, we don't know if this is true or not true. supposed evidence got destroyed in a flood, and we're never going to truly know. But all we can do is take a look at the facts that were presented and come up with our own opinion of what we think happened. In my opinion, I think this whole thing was a hoax and it's made up. It covered a lot of the holes that they left in Amityville by accident, and it does follow the classic Warrens trope of how they do what they do with the contracts, with the way the story is released, etc., etc. I don't know. With Carmen, I think that she has lied so much and she has bought into the story so much. I think that she thinks that this is true. Like, I think she's convinced herself at this point, and she's made a career now out of being like a spiritualist. So this is her moneymaker. So even if she knows deep down that this was all fake, she's really putting on a really good face for this and really trying to sell it to herself for her new career path.
Response to this is, if the ghost followed you down the street, you were so concerned that the ghost was going to harm your relatives, your friends, then the house wasn't haunted, the ghost was from you.
Tell me, what do you think about this story? What conclusions have you pulled out of looking at all this information? I love to talk to you guys in the comments below. Now, if you haven't already, if this is the first video that you've seen, go and check out the Warrens playlist, and as well I will link the other 2 shows I do. Don't forget about the Google form if you want to suggest a topic idea or if you want to put forward any of your personal paranormal stories. If you have enjoyed watching this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I do want to grow this channel out more, and liking the video really helps with the algorithm and helps show YouTube that people like you like to watch videos like this. I apologize if this video has gone too long, and if you're still here at the end, leave a comment, let me know. You guys have a good rest of your night though. Thank you for stopping by.